Hey guys, this is Nick with Cymatics. In this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about how to mix together your kicks and your 808s. I think it's a topic that many producers have trouble with at some point in their beat making journey, but I think it's pretty easy to adopt a pretty consistent set of steps to ensure that you're going to get a decent balance in your low end every time. And I wanted to talk a bit about how to set it up in the first place, which is using the right sounds. That I think is probably 90% of your battle. We'll be finding the correct samples, specifically the kick sample itself, because your 808 typically will be selected based on the whole track, and the kick will be selected more based on the 808. So you want to select the part of your song which is the most important for the whole track, which is the bass, obviously the 808 itself. It's going to be determined by your other instruments, but the kick will be more so determined by the 808 because that's really the only other instrument that it's competing with. So in this track, I'm going to just show you the balance that I have, and we'll discuss a bit about how to get there and what I did, because there's a few tricks that I employed here to make the kick consistent, and I'll also show you some examples of kicks that, to my taste, don't work, and also some alternative options that also do work. But let's play this.
Got a little bit from the south, but if she keep running her mouth, she gon' get kicked out the house. I ain't got time for no stress, I need respect. 100K all on my neck, who that's the weight on my chest? I got them pressed, damn you know I gotta flex. I gotta leave the streets, but I'ma keep it G. I gotta split the fee, I let my people eat. Had to go get the grades, I didn't get the lease. Had to go get the G, I get the broken feet. Put a man in the streets, I bet they know it's me.
Okay, so let's discuss how we got here to this point. The most important thing that I look for when it comes to a kick drum in the context of an 808 or a hip-hop beat with an 808 in it is that I need the kick to be consistent throughout the whole track. I really can't stand when a kick drum disappears across different notes of the 808, or a kick drum sounds very strong on its own but very weak with an 808, or conversely, when the 808 hits, the kick becomes overblown. That can also happen, and I don't like that either, because then when the kick plays on its own, it sounds weak. So let's play this low-end solo. Let's take the kick out. And then the kick by itself. So notice that when I bring in the 808, the kick doesn't seem to lose any power. The kick seems to be the same volume, the same strength, and the same sort of impact with and without the 808. Likewise, I can turn off the kick notes, and I can play the kick at any point throughout the 808 to show you that it'll be loud. At any point. So it doesn't matter that the kick plays at the beginning of the 808 at all times, because I can also put the kick, if I wanted to, just for the writing purposes, I can also put the kick somewhere else. And it's still going to penetrate. Now, you might notice that in this kick MIDI, I have two different notes. I have this C, and then I have this E, and you might be wondering why that is. And that's because in the track, the 808 actually goes up in pitch. This is without the kick. And if I kept the kick at the same pitch, let's drag it down, and let's listen to what happens to the kick on this second note. So compare the impact of the kick here to here. You'll notice the kick is gone. That's what I mean by the kick being inconsistent. If you play it in the context of the mix, it'll be even more obvious.
Slap me out.
Let's play here.
She gon' get kicked out the house. I ain't got time for no stress, I need respect. 100K all on my neck, who that's the weight on my chest?
So there's a big difference between the combined low-end impact of these instruments here.
Slap me out. Got a little bit from the south, but it's
and here.
I ain't got time for no stress, I need respect. 100K all on my neck, who that's the
The reason for that is because of phase. So the phase of the 808 and the phase of the kick, which the phase of a sound is essentially, think of it as this wave overlapping this wave of the 808, okay? Now, on some notes, these waves counteract each other, meaning this wave will go up while this wave goes down. And when that happens, in general, you get phase cancellation, which means that the sound gets canceled. If you ever wonder why or how noise canceling headphones work, if you ever get on a plane and you turn on your noise cancellation, your headphones have microphones on them which record the sound, and then they play the same sound back into your headphones but at an opposite phase. That's why the bass of the airplane engines disappears, because your headphones are literally playing the same bass of the engine but in the opposite phase. Now, when that happens in the context of kicks and basses and 808s, the same thing can occur where the kick will phase out the 808, and so both of them will cancel each other out. Now, that's a problem that is something you should try and avoid. Now, how did I avoid it on this beat? Well, since the phases of both instruments sounded good here, and the note of the 808 goes up here, I can just take the note of the kick and bring it up. You can do it the same amount. So here it went up a fourth, I think. I think for this one, I just took it up 3 semitones or so. And now let's compare how it sounds. This is before. The kick is just gone, and then let's pitch it up. So I think there it sounds pretty good. And you should always check these in the context of the track. So that's one idea. Now, the other thing you can try is, instead of pitching it up and down, you can simply use a utility. This is in any DAW, all you really want is just to invert the phase. So you just invert the polarity of the left and right channels. But notice that when you do that, the initial kick here, this first note, I actually liked how it sounded before, right? So that means if I invert the phase of it now, it's going to sound bad. Let's compare before and after. After. So the bass is a bit more powerful in this example. But let's see what happens if I do it on that note. This is without me pitching it up. Let's see what happens if I invert the phase. Boom. Now, if you remember, I said that you can approach this in several different ways. One thing, both examples of when a kick is too loud or too quiet, they're both bad because they indicate inconsistency in the low end. So if I use this trick, which you can do, and I've done this before, you can actually automate the utility to invert the phase only for this section of notes. Let's listen to how that sounds.
But if she keep running her mouth, she gon' get kicked out the house. I ain't got time for no stress, I need respect. 100K.
So now you hear that even though, yeah, the bass has returned, the bass and the kick has returned and it's more solid, but now all of a sudden it's actually overblown. So the phases of the kick and the 808 are aligning too much, and that's also not ideal. If that is what you want, then you can invert the entire phase without automating it, and then you can go back to this original note and play with this so that it's also overblown. But you might have to search for the note where that happens. Slap me out. Got a little bit from the south, but if she keep running her mouth, she gon' get kicked out the house. I ain't got time for no stress, I need respect. 100K all on my neck. Now, I don't really like how that sounds because even though the bass frequencies align better on this example with the phase inverted, something happens to the actual transient of the kick, the impact of the kick, which I don't really like. And that is also one thing I'd like to impart onto you guys, is that inverting the phase of a sound is not something that you just do and assume that nothing actually happens to the sound itself, because something does happen to the sound. If I just invert the phase, even solo, if I do it solo, the kick sounds manifestly different. It's not something you just do and then nothing actually happens to the way the sound plays from the speakers. If you imagine how the actual speaker moves in relation to the wave, it starts up here and then it goes down and then it goes up, and then so this is the cone going out and back in and then out again and in, and that changes in the opposite direction when you invert the phase. So then it'll start to go down and then up and then down and then up. And that totally changes the way that the kick is perceived. Even though it might kind of sound on the surface better when you invert the phase, a lot of times I feel like it's better to just keep the phase as is and then play with the pitch of the sample of the kick, going up and down to pitch, finding different pitches where the kick works well. So I find that's a little bit too bassy. So I like to have a balance where the kick it kind of hits your chest more and the 808 is hitting your stomach more, if that makes sense. That's kind of how I envision it. So when you get those things aligned, it's gonna sound good. Now, the most important thing, of course, is the sound selection itself. So the kick here, I'm always looking for a kick that's not overly distorted. So this kick, as you can see, it's a little bit clipped, but it has most of its wave intact. And that's nice because I'm pushing all of this through a soft clipper at the end of the master bus. And this soft clipper, of course, is what determines the sound of that kick and 808 combo. And when something is already clipped, it does not sound good going into a clipper again. It just gets double clipped. And at that point, you're losing a lot of the low end impact because the more you clip a sound, the more of that perceived low end subbiness starts to disappear. So you want to have a good balance between a punchy kick and one that is not overly distorted. I think this satisfies that pretty well. Now in this particular example, I used an EQ to kind of help the kick punch through a little bit in this region. I wanted that 500 hertz region to cut above this 808. So before, after. And that's a decision you need to make in the context of the other sounds of the song, because if you just do it, just the kick and 808 together, it's not going to take into account all the other frequencies that you have in the track. So another little tip I can give is that a lot of times it's a decent idea to do a very tiny bit of low shelf removal from the kick just to accommodate the 808 a little bit better. And paradoxically, like, you might think that it'll make it sound weaker, but actually it a lot of times makes the kick sound more powerful because it has more room to breathe and it's able to cut through the 808 a bit easier without having to fight for that sub information. All right, let's go here.
Got a little bit from the south, but if she keep running her mouth, she gon' get kicked out of the house. I ain't got
In this case, it's not super important because the kick itself does not have that much low end in it. But that is something you can try if you're finding that the kick is a little bit too subby and it's distorting too quickly when you go into the clipper. You can try applying this kind of shape. Usually I follow it up with like this, but without this sort of a thing.
got a little bit from the south, but if she keep running her mouth, she gon' get kicked out of the house. I ain't got time for no stress, I need respect. 100K all on my. Got a little bit from the south, but if she keep running her mouth, she gon' get kicked out of the house. Got a little bit from the south, but if she keep running.
That actually sounds quite good. So if your kick is a bit too soft sounding, and you've tried everything else, then you can try some kind of a transient shaper. So you can go into any plugin that has a transient button, or transient knob, rather, and you can...
Got a little bit from the south, but if she keep running her mouth, she gon' get kicked out of the house. I ain't got time for no stress, I need respect. 100K all on my neck, ooh, that's a weight on my chest.
You can give it some punch, but I don't really need it in this case because I don't want the kick to be too... I don't want it to jut out too much from the rest of the mix. I want it to still feel like a contiguous part of the low end. So if you apply too much of a transient shaping to it, it's going to have too high of a crest factor, which means that it's just going to pop out too much from the rest of the instruments. And the clipper will bring it back down, but it'll sound distorted. So really it's all about finding the right kick sample that kind of already incorporates the right amount of punchiness, right amount of low end. You can assist it a little bit with this kind of EQ shape, And it's also important that the 808 has a little bit of a attack to it. You can kind of engineer one yourself by using the fade like this, or have like a slower attack time. That can help, but again, I'm not trying to physically remove frequencies, or I'm not trying to physically remove sound to accommodate these instruments. I want to have all of them stay like together at the same amount of power and volume, because if I take away power from the 808, I'm taking away power from the low end, and I want to keep that power. I want to keep as much energy as I can in the low end. That's why I'm never gonna, in hip hop especially, I'm never gonna use any kind of side chaining, because unless your kick is like enormous, like a huge subby kick, which isn't really a thing in a lot of hip hop, if you sidechain your kick to your 808, you're going to lose a lot of sub. Even though to your ear it might sound as though, you know, they're mixing together well, it's kind of an illusion, because you're just replacing for that brief moment your 808 with your kick. And that works well in other genres, but in other genres where you want them to hit as hard as possible, you are best advised not to use any kind of sidechaining or anything like that, unless you know what you're doing. Some other examples of kicks that I feel like would not work is like this kick, for example.
Slap me out, got a little bit from the south, but if she keep running her mouth, she gon' get kicked out the house. I ain't got time.
The reason why I think that one doesn't work, it doesn't have the requisite impact and punch that I expect from a kick to compete with this 808. It's a taste thing, obviously, but this kick, when it's clipped into the clipper here, that's the thing where you can see there's already some clipping here, some hard clipping. It's getting kind of double clipped. It's also losing its sub. And it's just not very flattering when it comes to how it meshes with the 808 itself. And since it lacks that punch that I'm looking for, it's not really competing with the 808 basically. So I want it to, in general, I want the kick to be hitting me more in my chest, and I want the 808 to be hitting more in the stomach. And if I can get that separation clear enough, then I think I've succeeded in mixing them.
Slap me out, got a little bit from the south, but if she keep running her.
Alternatively, you can also use Vision, or any other visualization program, to do a little bit of analysis. I don't really use this that much because I kind of go by what my ear tells me. But you basically want to have a smooth transition between the kick and the 808, meaning without any gaps. So if I play just the 808 here, and then if I add the kick, it doesn't look like there was much of a difference in how it looks. And that sort of indicates that the kick is just kind of adding to the 808 rather than replacing things. You can see there's a small gap here. This is something that's indicating phase cancellation, a momentary phase cancellation, but that's the kind of thing that you can fix. You can try fixing it if you want to, but it's not something that really makes a difference, especially in the context of the whole mix. But in general, you do want to have a situation where you're not getting like big gaps, because that's indicating some kind of phase decoherence, and that's going to sound bad. But anyway, yeah, I think just to wrap this all up, the procedure is, in general, you find your 808, you are better suited to have an 808 that has at least a little bit of a gap in the beginning. You can also use a delay plugin to introduce a bit of delay so that the 808 is offset by a tiny bit. Once you have your 808 and that's mixed into the beat at the appropriate level that you like, then you start to bring in your kick. If you want to know the level differences, they're actually quite close in level. So let me bring down both of these instruments. You can see that the kick is of course peaking louder than the 808, but it's not by much. So when you find your kick, make sure it's consistent across all the notes. And if it's not consistent across all the notes, you want to pitch it up and down to ensure that it is consistent. If that doesn't work for you, then you can use the phase inversion method to see if it helps on only some notes or not others, or if it helps on all the notes, you just keep it on. If it helps on some notes and not others, then you can automate it on and off with this automation, like so. You can use a little bit of EQ, not too much. You're never going to really be boosting low end. I think that's unnecessary. You should just look for a different sample at that point. But you can reduce a little bit of EQ, a little bit of sub, and do a boost just adjacent to it. And if you want, you can also bring out some of the upper mid frequencies of the kick so that it can cut through a little bit more easily. Apart from that, that's going to be it. And you're always going to be kind of mixing this into a clipper. That's going to be the thing that determines how everything sounds. So even when I'm not really distorting everything with the clipper and I bring down the level, the kick is still clear. It's still coming through clearly. And that's really important, because if it's coming through clearly without any kind of clipping or distortion applied, that means that you can push it much harder into distortion and it'll keep its integrity longer. And by that I mean it's not going to crap out, basically. And then this becomes kind of a small balancing act between how do you want your kick to hit. Do you want it to be super loud and aggressive? Then you can bring down the clipping on the master and then bring up the kick volume here. And really it's just finding that balance. And then it's only once you have the kick and 808 work together well in terms of their actual phases and the waveforms that you're then free to set the volume of the kick wherever you want, because then the kick is fundamentally separated from the 808. It's become its own individual thing that you can then really treat and level to whatever balance you want without kind of sacrificing the intelligibility of the sound. So I hope you guys learned something from this tutorial. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.